So, this week I wanted to talk about what it means when you're stuck and can't get anything down on the page, and what are the possible things that can cause that, and what are some of the solutions to those problems. And I mean, yeah, pen and paper start writing, it is definitely part of it, but it's not the only thing. So, when we're talking about somebody who can't just write their book, who cannot get the words out, the first thing we need to figure out is why. So you're going to need to sit down, take some time, think about, why am I stuck? What is it that's holding me back? Are you stuck before you've written anything? Are you stuck when you're partway through a book? Are you just running into a wall? So let's kind of break it down and talk about some of the reasons a person might be stuck. Period. So let's start there. What are some of the things that you can think of that have resulted in you being stuck and not making any progress in your writing? And there are a whole bunch of possible reasons. So electronic devices, getting distracted, certainly that's one of them. Wanting to get it right the first time, yeah. Not sure what project to start next, okay. Are there any others? I've got a list here too, but I want to give everybody an opportunity to weigh in here. I see a few people typing. World building disease. Oh, that one's really hard. I understand that. That's a rough one. And it's very real, but it's tough. Yeah, previous negative feedback. All right, those are some really good examples. The ones I have are not knowing what to write next, which kind of ties into Ian's question there, or comment. Not knowing how your characters would react to a situation. Feeling like your book won't be perfect the first time you write it. Feeling like it's too big. Like, a novel's a lot of words. It can be a really big thing. Feeling like you're not really inspired. That can be a big problem. Things like not having the time or feeling burned out, like you don't have the energy to. No motivation to write without a serious deadline. That can be a big one, particularly for us neurodivergent folks, let me tell you. Not being excited about the project. Not being able to focus. There are so many different things here. And previous negative feedback is definitely going on the list of things that we're going to address. Okay, so let's kind of go through some of these in order. If you're stuck and have no idea what to write next, but you've gotten partway through your book, you've gotten some momentum, there are things you can do to break out of that. I'm going to address some of these also next, but I want to start with that one. When you're writing and you hit a brick wall, this most often happens, in my experience, when you don't have a clear view of what your end goal is, or you don't have a roadmap and know where you're going. If nothing else, when you're writing, you should know what the end looks like. You should know where you're headed with the story, even if you don't know all the twists and turns that'll take you there. You might start with, say you're writing a murder mystery, you start with, well, in the end, the cops are going to catch the bad guy. And that honestly might be enough. That might be a sufficient amount of information. However, it doesn't give you a lot of details. So what condition are the bad guys going to catch, the police going to catch the bad guy in the end? So you're going to want to think a little bit about what your end goal is. In romance, obviously the end goal is characters get together happily ever after, or happily for now, depending. But you're going to want a little bit more than that. Are they going to get married? Are they just going to finally decide they're going to seriously start a relationship? So having that goal in mind will help you break through the I don't know what to write next, because even if you're a pantser, having that goal in mind, knowing what your end looks like, will make it possible to get through the rest of the story. Because if you don't have an idea where the ending is going to be, you're just going to wander around in the desert for 40 years and not actually accomplish much. So that is one of the big places where I have found people tend to get hung up, is when they don't have a clear the end in their mind and know what that is going to look like on the page. Because without it, you can't go forward. That is a big thing. So usually what I do when I'm stuck in a situation like that, or don't know what the next step is, I will take my novel as it's written, and I will outline what I have. That'll be a sentence or two for every chapter, and then I'll go over those chapters, over those sentences, and go, all right, here's where I am, here's where I need to go, And then you can kind of start getting together ideas of how to get there. I mean, yeah, that's definitely an end goal. Lots of people dead. Sure, that's a way to end a book. Um, I guess it depends on the book. If this is a romance novel, I have questions. Though I know you aren't writing romance novels, you're writing high fantasy. So that is one of the things, yeah. You want to have that picture of the end goal. To go address some of the things that people brought up specifically. So, electronic devices, I'm going to tie that into being distracted. If you don't feel like you can write because you constantly get distracted, there are a number of things that help that. For me, I find that music without lyrics particularly helps a lot. You can also, a lot of writing software, including Microsoft Word, has what's called focus mode. And that will close off the rest of your screen so all you see is a box with the text in it and you can't see the rest of the screen. That can be really helpful when you have this constant instinct to respond to every notification. If your phone is the source of your misery, turn off your notifications. Either mute your notifications or put it on vibrate if you really need to be available. Or turn off your data, honestly. So that way you can only receive phone calls or texts, which are usually more urgent than my news app telling me about a headline about a sports team I don't care about. That is definitely a thing. Going to a place where there aren't distractions can be a huge help if your distractions are like local. So let's talk about sometimes distractions are more things like your family doesn't respect your writing time, or my cats are currently clawing at the screen in the back. That's a distraction for me. Voice dead. Am I not audible? Am I not coming through? Looks like I'm recording. Hold on. Sultan. Okay. Speaking of distractions, he's over here howling and being problematic. Yes, you. My husband's going to go feed them, which is probably why he's being loud and obnoxious. Anyway, one of the things that I do is I frequently go to my family cabin in the summers when it's open and available to me. I'm lucky enough to have something like that, and I can go up there for a couple of weeks. There's no internet. I don't have cell phone service. There's no television. There's just writing time and quiet, which is marvelous. I know Heather has a shed that her family, they built it in the backyard. She's got like a writing office that is a space that the rest of her family knows when she's out there. She doesn't go and work in her shame shack, all right. So she has that space. I know other folks who have an office. I know somebody who literally works in a closet because they can close the door and it's quiet. So things like that can be really useful for distraction. But if you can't get out of the physical environment that's distracting you, putting on some headphones that will cancel some of the noise around you. They don't need to be active noise canceling headphones. I use a pair of earbuds, inexpensive Bluetooth earbuds that have a noise canceling fit, and they drown out noise around me, and I put on music. And that way, nothing can really get inside that bubble. So something like that could be really helpful. But yeah, turning off the phone or turning it onto mute or vibrate or turning off your data, using focus mode, blocking out sound through other means, that can be really helpful for dealing with distractions. And also sometimes it might be a matter of like setting some boundaries, telling your family like, this is my writing time. Please do not be in here. Yes. Now. Please don't be in here making a bunch of noise while I'm trying to write. That can be a conversation that you need to have with folks. It might not be an easy one, particularly if you've got young kids, but it is certainly something that you could utilize. One of the big ones is something Anagram brought up, is wanting to get it right at the first time. This obsession with feeling like your story isn't going to be perfect the first time you tell it. And letting that kind of rule your ability to put something down on the page, which is really difficult. I don't think Kitaro is in this one, but it's going to be recorded, and I'm going to send it to him for homework. Because writing your story perfectly the first time is impossible. Like, Hemingway, Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, Jim Butcher, Anne McCaffrey, all of the greats that I can think of, like the top authors, all of them, the first draft is always garbage. It is a hot, flaming mess full of plot holes, inconsistencies, characters that may or may not show up again, and all sorts of problems. Like, you cannot ever write the perfect first draft. It will never happen. And if you wait until your ideas and your plans are perfect, you're never going to start writing. And you're never going to move forward. You're just going to be stuck in that perpetual, this isn't perfect, I gotta fix it, this isn't perfect, I gotta fix it mentality. And one of the big quotes that has always stuck with me that I heard, I don't remember where, but perfect is the enemy of good. Your first draft will not be perfect. Your story will not be perfect. But can it be good? Yeah, that's achievable. And good is good enough. And rough drafts, your first draft, okay, so it comes out like crap. The good news is that the only person who knows it's crap is you. And you can edit it. You can fix it. You can go in and change things. It's not stuck that way forever once it's on the page. Yeah, dead characters showing up after they've died, or a character putting something down 12 times without ever picking it up. I've had that happen before, where a character puts down a glass of water like 3 times in a scene when they never picked one up. My bad. Yeah, turning around 4 times. There are so many things that we're going to run into, so many mistakes we're gonna make. Yeah, exactly. There's a perfect image of a first draft. Too late, that is captured in YouTube forever. Fabulous. But that's a perfect example of a first draft. Let's look at my butt. But fortunately, the only person who needs to see your first draft is you. You don't need to show it to anybody, so even if it is truly, truly horrendous, you don't need to tell anybody about it. Nobody else needs to know. We can just pretend it was perfect the first time, and that's enough. You know, that's excellent. So don't just sit there in misery for the rest of your life, waiting for everything to get perfect, because it's not gonna be. There's no way around that. There's no way to get through that. It's just start writing. And if you start writing, things will happen. And once you have a story on the page, you can fix it. You cannot edit a blank page. And if you try and grind your gears forever, you will not write anything. And right, just like Lee demonstrated, you can delete the whole mess and fix it the second time. It doesn't have to be horrible forever. Yes, demonstrated by Gandalf. So absolutely don't just linger in the, oh, my idea has to be perfect, my story has to be perfect, and I have to be perfect at telling it the first time, because that's not going to work. It's not realistic, and you're demanding too much of yourself, and it's unfair. It's not okay. And I know there's a neurodivergent tendency to do that. You know, as somebody with ADHD, somebody who is autistic, I have this feeling like if I can't get it right the first time, if it's not perfect the minute I start it, it's garbage, I'm never doing it again. I know that feeling. But it's not right, and it's not true, so you have to kind of push past it and get out there. Another thing that was brought up, let's see, frozen about which project to start next. So when you don't know what project to start next and you're just spinning your wheels, I know for me, and this is going to reveal how much of a nerd I am, I make a dice table and I roll on it, and one of two things will happen. Either as the die is leaving my hand, I'll be like, oh, I hope it's this one, or oh, I hope it's not that one. So I can cross off the one I hope it's not, and if I do like, ooh, I hope I get this one, well, then I know what project I want to work on next. And it happens. It's this little magic moment as the die is leaving my hand and heading toward the table. I magically kind of know what I want, or I've narrowed it down to something I don't want. So you can kind of clean up that list a little bit using that. And if you roll and are like, oh, okay, I'll work on this one, well, then you can start forward on that one. And if you decide partway through that that's not actually what you wanted to write, well, you can always start writing something else. You're not stuck in a project forever once you start writing it. I've got 2 book series that are currently back-burnered for Smoke and Magic. The other 2 I wrote first. Smoke and Magic is the newest child, and it is the one I am most interested in right now. The other 2 book series are ones I want to publish, but they're not ready yet. One of them's a trilogy. One of them is going to be probably 4 books, maybe 5. But I wrote those first, and it's like, this doesn't feel right. I'm not getting what I want out of this, and I had to move on to another project. So if you don't know what project to start next, just grab a die. Right, yeah, grab a die, make yourself a table, do a roll, figure out in the middle of the roll what you want or don't want, and then you can get rolling. And yeah, you can absolutely just, if there's a project that, I'm just really not feeling this right now, or this isn't working for me, switch gears. Nobody needs to know. The only time that you won't be able to just jump track and switch something is if you're like Heather, who's in a contract, who's writing these books on a quick release timeline with a publisher. But if you're self-publishing or don't yet have representation or aren't in a situation like that, you can start and stop whenever. You can change projects in the middle. Nobody needs to know. That is a very important and useful thing. Remember, as with a lot of these things, writing, fortunately, is something between you and your computer screen, or you and your notebook. Nobody else needs to see what you've written until you show them. So if you've written utter garbage, nobody needs to know. If you've written genius, you'll probably hope that people know, but they aren't going to know until you tell them. And you can just jump track if something isn't really working for you. That is definitely an option. So, let's see, world building disease. So I'm going to say flat out that world building is its own hobby. It's just straight up. World building is a separate hobby from writing. You need to kind of look at your world building hobby and your writing hobby as two different endeavors. Kind of like how I look at my obsession with drawing maps these days as separate from my Pathfinder hobby or my D&D hobby. Much like making terrain for my game table is a separate hobby from my gaming, as is painting minis. Those are kind of, they're all in the same sphere, like all of those things are tabletop gaming related, but they aren't all the same hobby. So if you just want to world build until you've world built forever, that's an okay hobby to have. However, if it's getting in the way of your writing, try scheduling some separate time. Like, sit down and say, okay, I'm going to hang out and do some world building today. That sounds like fun. Or, I'm going to sit down and write today. Like, I have this story and I want to actually start writing it, so I'm going to start writing words to the story. Recognizing them as, well, that's kind of that is kind of like what J.R.R. Tolkien did, is he created this vast system of languages and world and all this history, and he was like, okay, I have this really cool thing I made, now what do I do with it? And I might as well write a book so I can at least use this thing I've created and make people like it. So that is a very valid way of doing things. Just recognize that world building and writing can be, in fact, separate hobbies. Because world building could be done for a D&D campaign. Gosh knows, I have a massive and complicated world that I have made for my D&D campaigns. Or maybe you just like to make worlds, and it makes you happy. Sure, I have a friend of mine who likes to design spaceships. For no reason other than the fact that he likes designing spaceships. He thinks they're cool. And he likes coming up with all these ideas and stories around them, but ultimately, it comes down to he likes designing spaceships. I like drawing maps. The maps that I make have no real... I'm not making them for anything, I'm just making them. So, looking at these as different might help break it apart. And I don't sit down to, like, alright, I'm going to prep my D&D campaign, crack my knuckles, let's get going, and start painting a mini, because they're separate. And yeah, info dump to the reader. When you're writing fantasy, info dumping is kind of necessary to some extent, so there is a balance between too much and too little, and there's a good happy medium in there. And fantasy and sci-fi, particularly the harder versions, have a lot more grace for providing a lot of information at once because the genres sort of require it. So that is definitely a thing. Let's see, scrolling up here. Finally, the last thing that somebody brought up was previous negative feedback. If what's holding you back is a feeling like you're not good enough because somebody else has been mean to you or other people have said you're crap, that is almost a trauma response more than anything. It's sort of like it's a response of people have hurt me before around this object, around this exercise, and I feel like I don't want to be hurt again. And that is an important thing to recognize and sit with for a while. Like if you need to yeah, if you need to process the fact that somebody hurt you, do that. And sometimes starting to write again or what have you is going to be an exercise in reclaiming a part of you that's really important. I know folks who have had really awful experiences around, say, music. They had a parent who really forced them hard to play music for hours a day because they weren't good enough, because they had to be concert level quality before the parent would think they were any good. And as an adult, that child, the adult, the person who was that child, decided, no, I really do want to play music. I actually enjoy music, and this is important to me. And as a result, they kind of reclaimed that music for themselves. So if you've been treated really badly by somebody, you can decide, I just want to write for me because I feel like I have a story to tell. It doesn't need to be good by anybody else's standards. I don't care about what other people think of it. I just want to write for me. And then maybe eventually you will find a community of people who like what you have to write, that you feel safe to share with. And that can be a really healing thing. So with something like you've been bullied, that requires a gentler touch. And in that point, it's less of a writer's block situation, more of a we need to work through this bad thing that's happened sort of situation, which is an entirely separate thing. It is related to writing, but there's so much more to that than just the writing aspect of it. And I know this might sound a little trite, but if you're really feeling that awful about it, consider talking to a therapist. If you've got one, say, hey, somebody really hurt me about this and I don't feel so good about this anymore. Or talk to some friends. Your option isn't you need more help than we can offer per se. It's just talking to people who won't treat you that way can be a really good way of dealing with things. Like you and I have had a lot of conversations. We dealt with somebody who was pretty abusive for a while. And a lot of the healing has happened in sharing those experiences with the people around us, coming together and realizing, no, we don't actually suck. In fact, we're pretty good writers. And creating a community of positive and loving feedback, which can be a huge and important thing. That's one of the reasons why I talk so often about why writing community is so important. Because writing is a solo exercise a lot of the time, and we tend to get wrapped up in our heads. And sometimes we end up with a lot of pain and misery associated with it. And working together as in a community can be a really helpful healing and bolstering thing. So that's kind of a long answer. And yes, Nid, this is in fact being recorded. So welcome to the group. If I'm preaching, so to speak, I'm recording to the best of my ability. The only time I'm not is if something goes terribly wrong and I lose a recording. I don't think that's what's happening today. So let's go on to some of these other things here. Feeling like the project is too big to start. I know writers who have this really massive, sweeping, epic fantasy plan that they're working on, like this huge project. And they're looking at the scope of what they want to do, and they're like, well, fuck. Where do I start? How do I get this going? It's so big. And the answer to that, of course, is going to be there are probably a million ways you could start. Just pick the thing that seems like it might be the most fun for you right now. With Smoke and Magic, there are a bunch of story start points in the series, because not all of this is going to be chronological order. Book 3 in the series, which is one I'm writing now, is actually the start point for another character. And I have other characters I could have started writing with in this series that are all going to come together and be part of the bigger meta. But I chose the character that I felt the most attached to at that moment, and whose story I felt, this is kind of the story I'm feeling right now. And so I wrote Fallen and followed Cassiel, who is one of my favorite characters and is very close to me. Book 2, well, I wanted to follow book 1, and I was like, I want to introduce this other character, and this is the place to do it. So I wrote book 2, which I'm currently tweaking. And then I was, at book 3, I was like, I need to introduce this other character in this other setting or this other aspect of the series in order to continue the plot. So just kind of do it with, like, piece by piece. And if you really are stuck and overwhelmed, feel free to write a couple short stories or flash fiction or whatever, like icebreakers, introduce yourself to your characters, introduce yourself to your world, and test the waters a little bit. And if those short stories are things that you like and want to keep, they make really good reader magnets for newsletters later, or things to add to your blog, or other, like, marketing materials. So even if you're not writing your main big story and you're just kind of dabbling, keep hold of that stuff because it might actually be useful for something. So kind of just look at this, and if you're dealing with a large series too, one thing that helps is, well, I know a lot of folks don't like to plot. I actually am working on putting my big series onto the beat sheet and deciding what the meta story is going to look like on the beat sheet, because you can do that. The meta story should fit into the beat sheet, and each book will fit into the beat sheet. We've talked about this before when I discussed Avatar: The Last Airbender and how every episode followed it, every season followed it, and the entire series followed it all together. And I have a blog series on that subject too that I can link to folks if they want to hear me nerd out about Avatar: The Last Airbender for a very long time. But if you're, so kind of look at the meta and then break it down into smaller, more achievable pieces. And that's going to be kind of how you combat this. This project is too big. I don't know where to start. Oh no, sort of feeling. Then we can kind of hit a moment of, like, okay, so somebody's stuck because they have a situation that they need to have happen in the story. And they don't know how to get their character there, or they don't know how the character would react to that situation. Like, I need my character to shoot this guy in the head. Let's just go with the most dramatic, I need my character to shoot somebody in the head. My character's nonviolent. They don't really want to shoot anybody. They're a really gentle, loving person. But I need this to happen for the story. So at that point, there are a couple of places that you can go for how to get point A to point B. But the first thing you should do is don't force it. If it feels unnatural to the character, it will feel unnatural to the reader, and that'll just destroy your suspension of disbelief. So start by looking at your character's history and their motivations. Who are they? And in this situation, what would they actually do? And sometimes you aren't going to get them to that plot point that you thought you needed them to get to. They're going to come up with another solution to this problem. For example, in Fallen, there is a point in time where they're talking about grabbing somebody and interrogating them. And the group is not really interested in this interrogation thing, and a lot of them are like, I'm not in the military anymore. I really don't want to do this. This doesn't feel right. And they ended up deciding to go about this in a slightly different way. Now, I'm not going to say much more because of spoilers, but they decided to, instead of kidnapping somebody and interrogating them, they decided to go about the interrogation a slightly different way. And it ended up as a product of these characters. The more I got into their heads, I was like, just because this makes sense and kind of is one of the first places somebody would go to get this kind of information, they don't want to do it. And so how do I make this work? And I do in the book. I make it work. And so I'm not going to spoiler anything, but that is, think about alternatives, ways around the problem. Because if your character just will not do the thing that they need, that you're like, no, this has to happen for the story to progress, there's got to be a way to make it natural and make it logical. There has to be some kind of key in there where either the scene's going to click and start flowing, or there has to be another way around it. Because, ultimately, it's up to you. You're the one in charge of all of this. You're the one who's writing this story. So if a scene isn't working, delete it. Start over. Not necessarily the whole book, but the scene. Start that piece over. And you're going to find that there is more of an option there for ways out of that. One of the other big things I hear from authors is, I just don't feel inspired. That's a big reason why people cite that a lot for why they're stuck. I'm just not feeling inspired right now. Just not feeling it. And while inspiration is extremely important, if we sit around waiting until we feel inspired to actually write something, we will never write anything. Or if we do write something, it's going to be very short. We can't rely on inspiration because inspiration is kind of fluid. It's loosey-goosey. It comes and goes. And while it feels great when you have it, you're not always going to have it. So you can't necessarily rely on it in order to move a project forward. So if you don't feel inspired, write anyway. There are situations where not feeling inspired might actually be because of something else, like burnout. And we're going to get to that one too, because burnout's a big problem. But not feeling inspired, the solution to that is just write. Unless the lack of inspiration is another thing going on with you that you've kind of got in disguise right now. If that lack of inspiration is burnout, stress, physical problems, maybe you aren't on the right medication if you are working with psychological issues. I mean, there could be a whole bunch of reasons why you aren't feeling up to it right now. But if it's literally just, I don't feel inspired to write right now, well, sorry, cupcake. Pen to paper. Either write or don't. Pick one. Kind of moving on to the burnout situation. Murderous green owl, yes. Exactly, lead. Moving on to the burnout situation, because it kind of ties into the last one. If you aren't feeling motivated or just can't seem to get your brain in gear, think about what could be really causing that. Is it just a lack of inspiration, or are you dealing with burnout? Because burnout's very real. I've been fighting a case of it for a few weeks now, where burnout can be caused by too much work, not enough rest. It can be caused by issues with mental health. It can be caused by things like just the world right now. Because if we're honest, a lot of folks are dealing with just an overwhelming amount of pressure and exhaustion and just fear, constantly scared because of the world situation between the pandemic, people's work situations, needing to deal with people being home all the time can be a lot of pressure. People's mental health is not very good right now. So if you just can't, and it's not happening for you, sometimes the answer is going to be do something else. Be nice to yourself. Have a cup of tea and watch some TV. One thing that I know is important can be like active recovery rather than just vegging out. If you're hearing a bunch of scratching noises in the background, that's my cat. She's decided that the box is offensive. Monster, what are you doing? Thank you. Dealing with burnout can be more of an active recovery sort of situation where you put some time and effort into recovering your lost energy. So whether it's meditation, whether it's journaling, it might be playing music or doing a craft of some kind, something that's going to kind of take your energy levels down, but isn't just zoning out. Though sometimes, honestly, zoning out is what we gotta do. Sometimes just there's not gonna be a solution to something right now, and we just need to escape for a while and not think. So, reading a book, watching a TV series, whatever it is, just like don't doom scroll social media because that actually isn't healthy. It's not going to be good for anything. So, there's that. As we look at all of this though, like I'm not here to be a burnout coach. I'm not qualified to coach somebody in burnout. But sometimes you have to actually, again, as with some of these other ones, like talk to a professional. talk to a therapist if you can. Like, maybe try and find some of the things that are down at the bottom, like causing all of this difficulty for you, and identify them, and then you can start working on them. Sometimes it might be you need medication of some kind. I'm fighting with my ADHD medication right now, and that's making it really hard to get anything done, because getting my brain to sit down and focus on anything is like trying to feed a toddler. It doesn't go well, and food gets everywhere, and eventually you give up and walk away. It's not easy. So sometimes medication might be the answer for some folks. It might be a matter of, I know somebody who was having trouble writing because they just couldn't focus, and it turned out that a family member of theirs had just died. Like, their family member had just died and they were grieving. And of course you're not going to have a whole lot of creative or emotional energy while you're dealing with that loss. Some people, they find that they can write through that. Other people, they really need the time and the space to deal with whatever it is they're dealing with and can come back to it later. That is really important. So there are a whole lot of different reasons why underneath the I don't feel like I'm inspired, why there might be a really good, solid reason you're not able to write right now. And that might need to be addressed first. And it's okay if that's what needs to be addressed first. That's okay if that's where you need to start. And it's healthy to deal with whatever's going on first before you start beating yourself up for not writing. That is one of the things that I see a lot, is people beating themselves up for not writing often enough when their lives are coming down around their ears. And sometimes we just don't have it. Sometimes life requires focus on other things. People who have family members who are sick, or children who need care, or work that's just taking every ounce of energy out of you and leaving you with nothing at the end of the day. Those are realities. And sometimes that's why you can't write. Getting through that is going to be a matter of finding a way to get out of that circumstance that's causing you to be stuck. And there's a whole lot of ways to get out of it, that depends on what's causing you to be stuck, but that's a really big problem for a lot of folks. Let's see, what else do we have? I don't have the time. If somebody says they don't have the time to write, it might be genuine. They might be working 14 hours a day, come home, eat, and go to bed. If that is your life right now, and you don't have time to write, the solution might be waiting until you do have time to write. It might be changing jobs, which if you're working 14 hours a day, coming home, eating, going to sleep, rinse, repeat, you probably would like to change jobs, if you can. So there might be, again, this is one of those external pressures you can't necessarily do anything about. But if you don't have the time because your time management skills aren't great, I can tell you that I get more done in a 30-minute sprint than I do in a lot of the other longer sessions where I'm just staring at a screen. A sprint is an excellent way to get some words on the page, and it doesn't have to take long. So for me, a sprint, I do about 30 minutes. I've been doing these co-writing sprints with other people on Facebook, but we can also start doing them here in the Discord. We have the writer bot, which will let people do sprints. It'll act as a timer. We can get into voice chat, say hello, and then start writing for however long, and then surface. When we're done, come back, reconnect. Those sprints, I can get 1,700, 2,000 words sometimes in a very short window during one of those sprints, because I am really dedicated and intensely focusing on just this thing for a little while. If you don't have half an hour, do 15 minutes. And try and create a routine around this. Whether it's at the same time every day, or whether the routine is you sitting down and doing something to get your brain ready for writing. It might be a certain playlist. It might be a particular kind of tea. It might be a particular mug. Whatever it is, get your brain into that routine so that they know when this thing comes out, we click over to those other gears. That can be a really effective way of getting at least a little bit done every day. And while you might not be the most prolific, or else the owl will kidnap your family, or you might not be the most prolific writer ever if you only write for 15 to 30 minutes a day, but you'll be further ahead than if you wrote for 0. And most folks, Again, if you're not working a ridiculous number of hours a day in a high stress profession, if you're there, you're obviously not going to be writing right now. But if you're not there and you're just kind of having trouble getting your butt in the seat, 15 to 30 minutes, most people can find that time. Most folks have 30 minutes that they can be like, okay, I'm going to take this half an hour and I'm going to work on this thing. And just descend into a project for half an hour. Most folks have that capability. So use those sprints and make that how you get ahead. And you'd be impressed how much you can get done once you find your stride and once you start really doing those. I want to get into doing some of those using the writer bot that we have in the Discord channel and encouraging folks to join me in doing sprints. I think I'd like to start scheduling some of those. And I think they'd be a lot of fun for a lot of us. And they're a great way to, again, get that social community aspect of writing together and not doing this all on your own. It can be a lot of fun. And it can be really motivating too, because we're all kind of there keeping each other accountable because we're all getting together to write for this time. And there's going to be less of a feeling like, I'm just not feeling this and walk away. But if you're doing it with other people, you're less likely to be like, okay, well, I'm done now, goodbye. It's far more likely that you're going to finish out the thing. Not feeling excited about the project is something else that can have you feeling kind of stuck. You know, like, this project isn't doing it for me, and unless this project is something you have to get done for, say, a school class, like if you've got a big paper, or if you are under a deadline for a publisher where you owe them that work and it has to get done, deadlines can be very motivating, let me tell you. But if you're not dealing with deadlines and don't have a serious reason to be motivated to do this thing, maybe it's not the project you want to be working on right now. Like, if you're just not feeling it, stop banging your head against the wall and try something else. If you just really are not feeling that, and I recently saw an author, I think it was the sort of Shannara author. He wrote the Shannara series. My brain is not pulling up his name because, yeah, Terry Brooks, thank you. I recently read a blog post that he wrote about how he has this particular story he wants to write to finish off this series, and he's been wanting to write it for years, and he's written it like 4 or 5 times, and it's just not happening, and he's really frustrated about it, so he keeps going and writing other things. If Terry Brooks can get away with that, I'm pretty sure we can too. So if it's just not clicking for you, if it's just not working, do something else. Take a break. Find something else that's really going to feel like, this is the thing. This is what I want to do. Find that kind of spark again. And while I said not to wait for feeling inspired, you shouldn't. If you're feeling the opposite of inspiration, maybe you're not working on the right project. Like, if you're just feeling totally demotivated, you want to write, but just not this, then write something else. That is probably going to be the answer to that. I was working on the first novel that I finished, full-length novel that I finished, was a high fantasy novel that I am really deeply personally attached to. It's a series that I'm really, deeply personally invested in because it's from a time period and a place and a story that a number of my friends and I sort of all wrote together, and people make cameos and such. And it's a really important story to me. And I wrote the first book, and then I rewrote the first book, and then I rewrote it a third time, and I'm halfway through the 4th rewrite right now. It's sitting on my computer, waiting. And I realized that as much as I love that story, it wasn't where my heart was right then. So instead, when November came around, I entered Nano and wrote this cyberpunk book that I'm really excited about, that I think is going to be either a duology or a trilogy. And I wrote that. And I edited that. And I looked at it, and I rewrote it again. I wasn't satisfied with it, so I set it aside. And then I wrote Fallen, which just sort of fell out of me in a rush. It didn't take me very, the writing time was about a year, but most of that was me writing and rewriting. And that wasn't the first draft. The first draft was done in a matter of a few weeks. It just the story just fell out. I was writing thousands of words, and I chased that to the very end of the book. Of course, the book was a mess and needed work when I was done. And so I went through and did all the self-editing, and when I looked at it, I felt, this is really what I want to be doing right now. This feels good. This is the story I want to chase. And sent it to my publishing company, which is me. So I approved my company publishing it because I have that benefit. I sent it to my editor, Mel, and had her look at it. And I mean, yeah, it is nepotism, but you know what? I'm allowed, all right? It's my company. I can do it if I want to. But I sent it to my editor, and she looked at it, and we worked on it, and voila, now I have a book out. Now I've got book 2 that I'm beating my head against. Now I'm closer to finishing that one than I was. But my book came out in January. The fact that I'm almost done with my rewrites of book 2 a month after that, not too bad. And I have book 3 half written, so I think I'm going to be able to keep the momentum up on this series because I'm really excited about it. But the key here was I had to find the right project. I had to find the right project for who I was and where I was in my life at that moment. And it turned out to be Smoke and Magic, not my high fantasy series or my cyberpunk. It turned out to be the urban fantasy. And so I chased it. And if you're in that situation where just like this project isn't speaking to you anymore, it's okay to put it down and start something new unless you have a real hard line reason that you need to do that. So that's kind of the list of things that I think that people get stuck on. Is there anything I didn't cover, or does anybody have any questions about anything I said? Because we've got like the last 10 minutes here winding down. Names are hard. That might be, like, I use a name generator, personally. There's Fantasy Name Generator, which is an excellent name generator. There are plenty of name generators online. If you're stuck with the names, that's going to be your best friend. Just grab one, be like, scroll through the names, like, oh, that sounds cool, they're now named this. And keep rolling. Because you can always change it later if you want to. But that's a really just efficient way of solving the name problem, because I too have issues with names. Names are my nemesis. Whether it's my players looking at me like, what's the barkeep's name? And my brain just blue screening, just boom, doo-doo-doo-doo. That happens a lot. Names are the worst. So name generators are going to be your best friend. Just grab one and keep rolling. Unless you really want to go with something like, this character is represented by these things, which this name is symbolic of. If you want to do that, excellent. But, like, for example, the main character of my high fantasy series is Archimedes. Why is it Archimedes? Because I like the way that name sounds, and I really like the cranky owl from The Sword and the Stone, whose name was Archimedes. So I made a character with that name, and I made him kind of cranky. That's how I named him, and that's why he's named Archimedes. Now, I justify it in the text, because he's in the Celtic Isles, but we're just going to move past that, because Archimedes is an excellent name. Yeah, an elven prince so ancient and powerful, his first name alone contains 20 apostrophes. His name is just all apostrophes. There's no actual letters, it's just apostrophes. So there's that. You could definitely go that route if you wanted to. Another way, if you want fantasy sounding names, take a real name and start messing with, like, switch out a single letter here and there, and you can change it into something really interesting sounding by messing with the vowels or the consonants a little bit, and you could come up with a really cool variation. That is an excellent idea. Yeah, the friends call him Bob. Yeah, perfect. Yes. His name is just apostrophes. So what do I call you? Lord Elf. Bob. Ah, that's excellent. I need to use that somewhere. Yeah. That's definitely fair. Nid, you can, the name generator, you can choose what culture you want the names to be from. A lot of baby name books or baby name websites, you can choose, okay, I kind of want it to be from this culture, and you can choose names based on the sounds of certain cultures. If you are using that, that's an excellent way of doing names. Babyname.com, I think, is one of them. Really excellent resource for that. Anything else? Anything else that people are stuck on or finding that's tripping them up when they're trying to write something? The research hole, yeah, that one can be tough. Um, it depends on what you're trying to write. If you're trying to write something that is historical, that can be a real trap. If you're trying to write high fantasy, you just kind of want something that's roughly accurate to the time period-ish. And if you don't know, it might be a whole lot faster for you to just ask somebody. As writers, I mean, I know for myself, I have collected friends with this really eclectic set of skills and knowledge. Like in Fallen, there's a scene in a colonial or Revolutionary War cemetery. And I posted on my Facebook about, hey, do I have any friends who do historical graveyards? And a friend of mine who was a gravedigger, in fact, several of them were, all chimed in and gave me the information I needed. This recent book that I'm working on, I needed to know something about sailboats. And so I went to a friend of mine who's a sailor and said, hey, can you tell me about this? And 2 days later, I know more about sailboats than I ever wanted to, but I know what I needed to know for my book. And I'm really excited about my friend having shared that with me. Like, I didn't ask to know all of that, but now that I do, I'm happy I know it. So that is kind of you might find there's a shortcut to researching it yourself by, you could also use like Quora. I found that really effective when I was looking up information on fishing boats. So using Quora, Quora, lets you ask questions, and you can get answers from folks in the industry or who know about that particular thing and are experts on that subject, rather than trying to research it all yourself. Because depending on the subject, trying to research something on your own can be a lot. It can be a lot. So use... you can also try Reddit. Reddit, Quora, Ask a Friend, whatever. But because I have had times where I fell down the research hole and came out knowing more about 15th century men's underwear than I ever wanted to, and none of that was germane to my book. So I'm just sitting here like, what happened? How did we get here? And here we are. So that is definitely a thing. We've got like 3-4 minutes left before I go eat dinner, and this is one of my last 2 sessions as DM for this campaign. I think it's going to be 1 or 2 more sessions, and we're wrapping up this campaign, which was a level 1 to level 20 campaign, and I'm super excited about it. So I'm gunning to go. How to start editing. Editing is an entirely different subject. How to start editing, I would say once you've finished writing your book, I mentioned this earlier, outline your story as you have written it. Go back, look at every chapter, write a couple sentences, and look at it from a bird's eye view, and then you can be like, does this make sense? How are the plot holes looking? And start there. Once you've done that, you can start filling in those plot holes. Read the book, too. Just read it and make notes in the margins. And, use the comments function that Word has and make notes. You can do that. But editing, it's a really big subject, and I can't cover that in 2 minutes. That's also not stopping you from writing. That's editing, which is a separate adventure. Next week, yeah, I can talk about self-editing next week if that's something folks would like to hear about. I can do next week's workshop on self-editing. I can also break down what you can do versus what you probably need a professional for, and that could be what we cover next week. Yeah, editing's a lot. It's fun. It's a lot of work. It can be a lot of frustration, and there's only so far you can take your own writing in self-editing. There's only so much you can do, because eventually you're just going to start getting blind to the word choices, and you're going to have repeated words that you aren't going to read because you're going to read what you intended to write rather than what you did write. So that is absolutely a thing. So we can definitely get into some of that next week. Last 2 minutes. I have enough time for one more question. And monsters making noises in the box again. All right, we'll call it here. I'm going to say have a wonderful evening. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to get this uploaded to YouTube as soon as reasonably possible. If not tonight, maybe tomorrow. I've got D&D tonight, so we'll see how late that takes me. I'm looking forward to dinner too. I am super hungry. All right, have a great night, everyone. Love your faces. I will see you soon, and take care of yourselves. I look forward to our next session, if my mouse would work, and there we go. I will talk to you all later.